Ever felt inspired by activists like Greta Thunberg or people that you've studied in history like Martin Luther King Jr. or women marching during the Women's March and questioning how to join? Well, this is the video for you. Let's discuss how to become a youth activist or just an activist in general. So before we get into the video, I just wanted to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about my history in activism. So first off, hello, my name is Nia-Blessing Armstrong. I consider myself an activist. I remember my first step in activism in the second grade. I remember noticing in my grammar school that there was not enough of recycling bins, and I was very concerned about that. So young little me in second grade discussed with my teacher and also my assistant principal, which eventually I got to talk to my actual principal of the school, about adding more recycling bins. And I made flyers, I remember, and having people join me, asking, let's make our earth cleaner and be more smarter about it. So that was my first step in activism. As I remember in high school, I started to be even more passionate about it, especially during the time in high school was the first time of me understanding how much I really cared about issues and social justice movements. So that really started with me getting into Black Lives Matter, which then I've always stood as an environmental person who cared about the earth. So that led me into my path where I am now as an environmental policy major at Loyola. So activism, your road to it, it doesn't matter how young you are, how old you are, be inspired by getting into it. And don't be afraid. So this video is here to help you how to get started on your road. This video is inspired by the pillars of a book entitled Youth to Power by Jamie Margolin. And honestly, this book is really inspiring, and at the end I'm going to include a book review and basically the depth of this book. So basically this book serves you as a guide. It doesn't matter what movement you're interested in seeking, even though she is known for standing on for the environmental movement with Greta Thunberg. But this book really just serves you as a guide on your first steps of becoming an activist or a youth activist. So let's get into the video. So the first step to your road to activism is finding your why. So what is your why, if you ask? So your why is basically your purpose onto why you want to get into activism, as well as why you have such a passion for that issue and why you want to make a change. So for example, as someone whose passion is for the environment, my why is for POC suffering in food deserts. Especially, I am a Chicago native, so food deserts is a great issue in my city, and I see it every day. And it is a passion because sometimes I feel like in the environmental movement, people forget about POC being like the most affected by climate change proportionally. So that is my why into activism. So you might be asking, Naya, how did you find your why? I found my why just by being reflective, as well as just something that I've always cared about since I could remember, since high school, my freshman year. So you're wondering, how do I find my why? Well, my recommendation to you is to maybe take time to yourself and think about what made you have this passion for activism, as well as why are you seeking things to give you an answer onto why you should go on the road to activism. So it's okay if you don't know your why right away. It just takes time for you to figure out your true passion and why these issues mean so much to you. So your second step into your road of activism is beginning your first steps in the movement that you desire and that you have a passion for. So these first steps can be seen as first finding an organization that expresses that activism. So for example, me being an environmental activist, my first step was I got in contact with my local Greenpeace organization in Chicago, as well as Sunrise Movement, and I became a volunteer there. So you can get started by just simply being a volunteer. Being a volunteer, this can be seen as someone who does phone calls to asking people, can you donate to this organization to make a change, as well as knocking on people's doors, or even helping the campaign or the organization you're a part of with social media. Just little things like that. Volunteering gets you instructed into the activism and like how actually the work happens. So it simply starts by just you digging in and simply going to work. So you might be thinking, that is really intimidating for me. And that's okay. It can be intimidating because it's a whole new world and you're just starting to get into the road. So you can simply, if that intimidates you, you can simply just get started by attending meetings and observing the meetings. So since COVID-19 has hit, there are organizations that I know. Okay, let's start again. So since Corona has hit, and social distancing is very important, you can go through your organization's website, and also some organizations are still hosting meetings but virtually. So that can just be a start for you to get introduced to your community and to fellow activists, as well as making friends through activism. So for example, in the future, you guys can attend a protest together, and etc. So it's just you building that community slowly and being introduced into the activism. So your third step into your road of activism is ingraining yourself into your organization, meaning that you grow and take extra steps. So these extra steps may look like you learning how to actually be professional, because professionalism actually does come with becoming an activist, because you are being in contact with public figures like mayors, like local politicians, your local aldermen. So you are in the process of learning how to contact your aldermen and local politicians. So this looks like you writing an actual cover letter, which basically is a formal letter where you put your organization's address, saying, for example, in my ward in Chicago, I live in the first ward, so it'd be like Greenpeace, the address, and then I'd be saying my alderman's name, saying, Dear Mr. Laspada, on behalf of my organization, blah blah blah, I would like to point out issues that I have concerns of with, on my part, I would say, with the environment and the toxicity of my ward. It would be in that order, something like that. And you will not be alone in not knowing, because this is something that's not talked about, because in being an activist, people commonly always think of visibly like people out in the streets, people protesting, which is all a part of activism, but other parts is people who are writing. So if you are a great writer, you should take advantage of that use and be persuasive and write to local politicians to discuss why these issues matter in your local in government or in your local city or town. So that's a third step to consider, which is learning about the professionalism of being an activist. The fourth step within your activism is heading up your own movement. So, what does that mean? That means that you are taking steps in becoming a leader in your movement. This can look like when you join an organization and if they have a space for, let's say, lead canvasser, someone who leads the canvassing across your whole town or city. That is a space for you to grow and to actually create your own social network within, meaning that you are friendly with your local alderman, your local mayor, even. So, this is basically you branching out and becoming a leader within your movement. And it's almost your moment where you feel confident in leading and leading others who were just like you before, who didn't know how to join a movement or become an activist. So the fifth and final step to your road of activism is actually getting people to join you, which I feel that is very obvious. But if you want the movement to stay alive and to keep on growing, is to get younger generations to join you, which is the most rewarding feeling, because you feel as if you're seeing people who are at the same spot as you, who didn't know what to do and how to help with these issues to not essentially exist anymore. So having people join you is what keeps the movement alive and keeps on growing. So now I want to discuss about the mental health aspect of being an activist. I feel when we talk about activism, this is something that sometimes can be forgotten, because being an activist has its most enriching and amazing and rewarding moments, but sometimes it can be overwhelming, because as activists, we are pointing out an issue in society, right? And sometimes, as we see with the recent presidency, that most often leaders do not care about those issues. So sometimes that can be disheartening, because as an activist, you have your wins and your wins and your loss. Because as you protest, as you advocate for these issues, sometimes people will reject you, and it causes you to feel down sometimes. But honestly, it's okay, because it's just a part of the journey of being an activist. And I just want to touch on that because I feel like it's something that needs to be said. And sometimes you need to take a break from being an activist, because it can be tiring. And there are still, like, you might feel that you are giving up, but initially you're not, because there are many others behind you who are standing with you. And then you taking that break is rewarding, because you can come back within the movement better. Finally, I wanted to end this video, as I said before, that this video is very much inspired by Youth to Power by Jamie Margolin. I feel this book is a really great guide for young activists, and I would certainly give this book to 14-year-old me, who really wanted to go out and actually have the feeling of wanting to go out and protest. So I recommend this book. This is a longer version of this video, what she goes through. She goes through how to become an activist, how to find your why, as well as the mental health of an activist, and she really walks through it, as well as how I discussed a cover letter. She puts in great detail about it. So if you're a person who is wondering how to become an activist, or how you really want to make proactive justice in your movement, this is a really great book, and I recommend every young activist to read this, because it's such a great point of view, as well as she gives collective points of views of POC in this book through interviews, which is at the end of every chapter. So I think this is a very cohesive book on becoming an activist, especially a youth activist. So I recommend it. For watching this video. I hope this is helpful in finding your journey into activism. As I said before, this book is very useful, and I think it's helpful to youth activists in getting introduced into the movement of becoming an activist. So I just wanted to end off in the note saying, don't be afraid to use your voice, because often, as Jamie Margolin has said, that we have been taught to silence ourselves. Since at a young age in kindergarten, we've been taught to raise our hands. So don't be afraid to raise your hand and ask the questions of these issues and why these issues even exist. So good luck on your journey on activism.